Oh, I figured it out. Sukuna's curse technique. Sukuna was born with the consumption curse technique and cleave and dismantle, while Yashiro was gonna be born with Fuga. Which means that in next chapter, when Sukuna's about to use a Fuga of his own, Yuji, who's the son of the reincarnation of Yashiro, should be able to send a Fuga back. I think this is it.
Recent chapters of JJK have been anything but a roller coaster would be an egregious understatement. In fact, in just a matter of a couple of chapters, it was confirmed that Yuji has blood manipulation that he acquired by eating the rest of his brothers, the death womb paintings that hadn't been given bodies, that Yuji has the shrine, or I guess more importantly, cleave and dismantle, which he got from eating Sukuna's fingers, that Uyui has the ability to swap people's souls between bodies, which is how Yuji got as powerful as he did in a short amount of time because he was able to switch with practice cursed energy manipulators like Kusakabe. And oh yeah, Sukuna had a twin brother that he ate in the womb. And that twin brother reincarnates in every single generation. And the most recent reincarnation of that twin brother, Yashiro, was Jin Itadori, Yuji's father, which is why Kenjaku chose him for baby making time. And thus heading into any and all future chapters of JJK, I believe it's best for us as a fan base to keep an open mind, to just truly be as pliable as possible, because the last 3 chapters have made it abundantly clear that genuinely anything can happen. And it's with that in mind that I want to prepare you for what I have for you today. Because today, I want to talk about the possibility that Yuji is gonna eat all his friends, which I'm aware sounds like a real Abraham Lincoln vampire hunter twist on history, but like I just said, we're preparing for truly anything happening, so stick with me. Because as ridiculous as it sounds, this theory holds a fair amount of water, and it not only might actually be the best way for Yuji to get out of his current situation, but also might be the only way that Sukuna ever stays down for good. Before we get into all that, today we gotta talk about our favorite recurring sponsor to the page, BetterHelp. Now, when it comes down to sponsors that have played massive roles in my life, there is no sponsor that holds a bigger stake of my personal life than BetterHelp. See, everybody believes that being a YouTuber is the easiest job on earth, and while it is fun and entertaining, it definitely has its darker sides. Me and pretty much every other YouTuber known to man, unfortunately, dictate a lot of our worth through the numbers that we receive views-wise. And therefore, while this job can seem fun and entertaining and easy, there was a time in my life where I went through serious bouts of depression because my videos weren't doing as well as they usually did. And fortunately, this is where BetterHelp came into my life. See, through the help of a therapist that I was able to find through BetterHelp, I found positive reinforcement strategies that allowed me to deem my worth in things much more substantial and important than just numbers and views. But how can you have that experience for yourself? Great question. Well, like we've already established, BetterHelp is set up to allow you to connect to licensed therapists who are trained to listen and help you with non-biased information. And this process is fast. I was matched with a therapist in under 48 hours, and that's usually how it goes for everybody. All you have to do is go to their website using the link, which is found on screen right now, and answer a few questions, and BetterHelp will be able to match you with a therapist in usually less than 48 hours. And the professional that you're matched with will have years of experience helping people with issues like you're having. And there's tons of ways to connect to and talk with this professional. You can chat with licensed therapists through your phone or computer, via voice call or video chat, or even messaging functions, however you feel most comfortable. It's the easiest possible way to get connected to a therapist. So let BetterHelp connect you to a therapist who can help you by either following the link on screen or in my description, or by selecting the Weeb Commander at checkout at betterhelp.com. And if you follow the link in my description or select the Weeb Commander at checkout, you'll receive a special discount in the first month of your BetterHelp subscription. So what are you waiting for? It's time we started taking care of the things that truly matter. But before we get to delving into Yuji becoming a friend cannibal, a Frannibal, if you will, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you love the idea of me talking about your favorite anime and manga, go ahead and follow my anime podcast, Talk Synonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime and manga this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And if you want to see me live, come on down to Comic Palooza, Memorial Day weekend in Houston, May 24th to the 26th, where I'm going to be doing 6 panels talking about anime and how to become an anime YouTuber. See, out of all of the twists we've had thrown our way over the course of the last couple of chapters, by far and away, the most impactful one was the fact that Yuji has the ability to assimilate the abilities of any person he consumes. That is to say that if Yuji consumes the flesh of a cursed spirit, or hypothetically a human, though he hasn't really done that yet. At least not a full human. We'll get into it in a second. Then Yuji will be able to use a slightly rudimentary version of the curse techniques that human and or cursed spirit had. Now, I say rudimentary because it appears as though Yuji has just figured out he can do this, and mastering these techniques takes years of practice that Yuji just simply hasn't had. But it is because of this ability that it's now been confirmed that Yuji has blood manipulation and the shrine. And it is with the reveal of this ability that many believe that Yuji has finally been cemented as the MC of this story. The entity of power he was always supposed to be, a person now possibly strong enough to defeat Sukuna, the final baddie. However, as it currently stands, Yuji has only consumed the flesh of those that society would deem were evil, like the Death Womb paintings, his brothers, and Sukuna's fingers, both of which are at least half cursed spirit, because the Death Womb paintings are half cursed spirit, half human. But why is that? Why has Yuji only eaten a couple of cursed spirits? If Yuji truly does have the ability to assimilate the cursed techniques of any person whose flesh he consumes, why is the Kusakabe Coalition not running Yuji around like he's Kenjaku in his early years of Jujutsu High and shoving as many cursed spirits down his throat as possible? Well, it is technically a possibility that this ability only applies to cursed spirits, and if that is the way his consumption ability works, then his options were kind of limited, because in the 1 month time skip they had between Gojo's unsealing and Gojo and Sukuna's battle, the Kusakabe Coalition seemed to be more focused on sharpening Yuji as a tool as opposed to shoving as many weapons into him as possible. But not everybody had to be involved in the training of Yuji. Why didn't a couple people from the Kusakabe Coalition go out and collect as many strong cursed spirits as possible for possibly the first week of the month time skip they had, and then they would feed those cursed spirits to Yuji so he would have 3 weeks to figure out those cursed techniques. I mean, God knows there was plenty of incredibly powerful cursed spirits that popped up during the Culling games, like the cockroach spirit that Yuta battles against. But I believe if this is the circumstance, there's a pretty good rationale for not going that route, as it's become rather obvious through Yuji's usage of these techniques that he's copied that he can't immediately master any of the techniques he assimilates. He needs time to work with them because of his meager cursed energy control. This is the entire reason he switched with Kusakabe, that and the fact that Kusakabe had to teach his body how to make a simple domain, and thus trying to stuff Yuji with as many cursed techniques as possible wouldn't be a feasible strategy. I mean, Yuji can't use the shrine at the level of Sukuna and can't use blood manipulation at the level of Chozo or even Kamo no Otoshi. But still, even having a rudimentary version of these cursed techniques in his back pocket has clearly come in the clutch. So what if instead of trying to shove as many cursed techniques as possible into Yuji, he was instead given a few crucial and wildly powerful cursed techniques, all in preparation for his upcoming battle against Sukuna. Techniques so wildly powerful that even a rudimentary version of them would act as an assistance in the battle against the final baddie. But what techniques, and how would he get them? Would he have mastery over them, or would he have to find his way mid-battle against Sukuna? And what do Yuta and Ui have to do with any of this? Well, today we're going to be answering all those questions and a whole lot more. But first off, let's start with the easy questions. Nick, do you genuinely believe that Gege would force Yuji to eat small packets of flesh that came from his dead friends to get their cursed techniques? Yeah, I do. This man hates Yuji, and there is nothing that would make Yuji more upset than having to eat his dead friends who he wasn't strong enough to protect. Not to mention that all of the cursed techniques he would inherit from these dead friends would serve as a constant reminder of the people he could not save along the way. On top of this, there's an obvious and clear line being drawn between Yuji and Sukuna. One, the two of them have appeared so similar in appearance for the entirety of JJK, there's been theories that Yuji was somehow Sukuna's son, but it was recently revealed a couple of chapters ago that Yuji isn't Sukuna's son. He's Sukuna's twin brother's son, which through the eyes of cursed energy makes him Sukuna's son. And the true base of the shrine, Sukuna's true cursed technique, might be the consumption ability we're currently seeing in Yuji. As Sukuna is constantly talking about eating when he wants to eat, his ability is to slice and dice people, and thus his connection between Sukuna and Yuji in terms of their possible shared cursed technique might hint to the fact that Yuji is going to have to hit a level of dedication to acquiring power that only Sukuna has ever achieved before in order to overcome Sukuna. But the best question to ask in response to the statement, Yuji is gonna eat his friends, is how? And also, who do I mean when I say friends. Well, I mean, the people who have fallen in battle against Sukuna up until this point. See, while Yuji has been rather involved in all of the battles that have happened against Sukuna ever since Gojo lost, there is something that hasn't sat right with me this whole time, and that is that Yuji will disappear for a chapter or two every single time Sukuna switches to a new opponent. Well, at least starting with after Sukuna battled against Higuruma, because obviously Kashimo jumps into the battle as fast as he can after Gojo falls, and then Yuji and Higuruma jump in after that. But immediately after Higuruma's defeat, Sukuna was challenged by Kusakabe, not Yuji. And he also disappeared after Yuta's defeat. And every single time that Sukuna goes to fight somebody new, Yuji has to make a grand re-entrance to try and re-jump Sukuna. But I don't think that Yuji's absconding off with the bodies of his fallen comrades so he can ghoul munch on them in the corner. One, because Yuji probably wouldn't do that. Two, because the majority of the people that got cut down by Sukuna probably didn't die in that moment. And three, because I don't think Yuji has started the friend buffet quite yet. See, because there's something else suspicious happening on the battlefield. Something much more suspicious than Yuji's disappearances, and that is Oi Oi's teleportation of all of the fallen comrades off the battlefield to an unknown position. And while the generally agreed upon sentiment is that he's teleporting all of these injured combatants back to Shoko, who's healing them, Sukuna very clearly stated to us that reverse curse technique works way better when applied to oneself than when applying it to somebody else. That is to say that reverse curse technique can really only bring you back from the brink of death when you're the one doing it to yourself. And thus, for people like Kashimo, Gojo, Higuruma, and even Kusakabe, Shoko's reverse curse technique may not be enough to bring them back from the brink, especially when you consider the fact that there is 4 of them, and Shoko probably doesn't have the curse energy necessary to bring 4 people back from the brink of death. Gojo's cut in half, I believe Kashimo turns to dust, and both Higuruma and Kusakabe get the big old X of death. And thus, what if Yu isn't bringing these bodies back to Shoko for healing, but instead to make them into an easily consumable package for Yuji to consume, hoping that when he eats this package of the raw flesh of his dead teammates, he acquires their curse techniques. See, Shoko is not only the best user of reverse curse technique we've seen outside of the likes of Yuta and Gojo, but is also just a straight up medical professional. And if anybody in the universe was going to be able to take the corpses of fallen, incredibly powerful sorcerers and break down their bodies and possibly souls into something that could be consumed for Yuji to acquire their powers, it's important to note here that users of reverse curse technique, especially those who use reverse curse technique on others, have to know the exact shape of the soul of the person they're working on, and therefore Shoko stands a pretty good chance of understanding the soul of the sorcerer laying on the table in front of her, and therefore taking that soul and breaking it down into something that Yuji would be able to consume, kind of akin to Sukuna breaking his soul into 20 fingers that would be passed down through history. But this kind of thing would take time, and the Shoko would need a pretty substantial amount of time and resources to make these soul and meat packages to send off to Yuji. But this is a last case scenario. But then again, so is Yuji defeating Sukuna. The plan to defeat Sukuna started with Gojo, and then it went to Kashimo, and then it went to Higuruma, and then it went to Yuta, and then it went to Maki, and now it's on Yuji. And thus it would make sense, since Yuji is kind of the last line of defense, so it would make sense that all of the fighters that said they were going to fight Sukuna before Yuji would say, if I die, give my body over to Yuji so we can use my curse technique to defeat Sukuna. And thus these bodies are being broken down by Shoko, and once they're prepared, kind of like a Sukuna's finger, they'll be sent back to Yuji on the battlefield. See, because while there is a possibility that some of the people being sent to Shoko are genuinely trying to be saved, those who were sent back to Shoko in the direst of situations also just happen to have the strongest curse techniques, like the Six Eyes or the Limitless. And thus it became very clear and very evident that Gojo was going to bounce back from his dissection, breaking down Gojo's body, possibly into 10 fingers and 10 toes, for Yuji to consume so he would be able to inherit the power of Gojo wouldn't be the worst idea of all time. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time that Yuji had eaten somebody else's fingers, and Yuji himself said that he would eat anything in order to defeat Sukuna, and that anything could very feasibly include little bits of Gojo. And this ideology can be applied to anybody who's been cut down on the battlefield, so long as they couldn't be saved. And I believe there is 3 people who very much check the box of couldn't be saved. And those 3 people are Kashimo, Gojo, and Higuruma. 2 of which Yuji really wouldn't want to eat. But if Sukuna is able to find another gear, or Yuji is pushed to the point where black flashes simply aren't cutting it, kind of like right now in the manga, I could see the abilities of any of these three sorcerers coming in massively handy. But Nick, didn't you just establish that when Yuji consumes somebody else's flesh, it takes a while for him to master the cursed technique that he's now inherited? Yes, I did do that. Good memory. Because yeah, Yuji started consuming Sukuna's flesh over a year ago, and he still has to touch things in order to use Dismantle on them. And even after coming into contact with something, it still takes a second for Yuji to cut them. On top of that, he can't use Convergence for blood manipulation, so Chozo had to give him something to allow him to use Convergence, which means that Yuji has really only gotten to the point with blood manipulation where he can literally manipulate his blood, not fire it off like Piercing Blood or use supernovas. On top of that, Chozo had to give Yuji a halftime update on how to use RCT with blood manipulation to make sure he actually healed his body like he should. So how is Yuji going to use any of these curse techniques that would be presumably thrust upon him mid-combat against Sukuna? What, is he just going to figure out how to use the Six Eyes and the Limitless and Judge Man and possibly Kashimo's Electrified CE if they can collect enough of his dust? Well, it won't be Yuji, or at least not his soul. See, it's already been established by the fact that Yuji had to switch with Kusakabe in order to learn basic cursed energy manipulation. That when it comes down to learning and perfecting new cursed techniques, Yuji is a bit slow, which is encapsulated by the fact that the simple domain that Yuji creates in order to block Sukuna's new Binding Vow domain expansion was stripped away in what felt like a matter of seconds, when the real reason that Kusakabe and Yuji switched in the first place is because Kusakabe had to teach Yuji's body how to use simple domain because Yuji had no way to counteract a domain expansion. But nope, Yuji literally had to reattach his own leg because his simple domain is stripped away and his leg is cut off by the domain's effect. But Yuyui said he could swap 2 times before the battle against Sukuna. And we know that one of these swaps was with Kusakabe. Now we're assuming from this point on that Yuji and Kusakabe switching once doesn't need to be undone with an additional switch. That is to say that Yuyui saying that I can do 2 swaps before the battle against Sukuna isn't saying that I can switch Yuji and Kusakabe twice, but instead saying that I can switch Yuji with 2 people. But this has led the fandom to start wondering about who could be the second person that Yuji would switch with, which has led many people to believe that it was either Chozo or Shoko, you know, because they're people who could teach him how to use reverse curse technique, an ability he now has. And while I do believe that both of these are definitive possibilities, about 10 chapters ago, or maybe a little bit more, when I first realized that Yuji was going to inherit blood manipulation, he thanked Noritoshi Kamo for helping him, going further to say Chozo was a bad teacher, which is odd now if you think about it, because if Chozo and Yuji had switched bodies and Chozo's soul was able to exist in Yuji's, shouldn't have Chozo been a fantastic teacher? Wouldn't have Yuji's body, which is built the exact same as Chozo's, figured out blood manipulation almost immediately? Or wouldn't Yuji, now being in Chozo's body, realize the power of blood manipulation and use that experience to master it in a matter of weeks? See, because while we can sit here and say, well, Yuji wasn't able to figure out simple domain and that should be easier than blood manipulation, Kusakabe is not a death womb painting. Both Chozo and Yuji are. They are Kamos, and thus if Yuji switched with Chozo, he should have had a much easier time figuring out blood manipulation as opposed to simple domain, new shadow style. He has no experience and no genetic ability to figure that out at all. But for some reason, Noritoshi Kamo was involved in teaching Yuji blood manipulation, which leads me to believe there wasn't a second switch. At least, not yet. See, out of all of the people I've said are down for the count and are possibly being broken down into meat packets for Yuji to consume, I've left one name out, and that was intentional. The one name that I've purposely omitted is Yuta. See, because Yuta dying makes no sense. Sukuna, while he was able to do the chant necessary to fire off a world-cutting cleave, which was then fired directly into Yuta's chest, possibly killing him, was just hit with a maximum output Jacob's Ladder and a punch from Yuji. A punch that granted Yuji the ability to reach out to Megumi's soul. And while in that moment Megumi rejects Yuji, gaining access to Megumi's soul at all is something that Yuji didn't do after hitting 8 black flashes in a row. And as has been established very clearly, every single time Yuji comes into contact with Sukuna, he creates separation between Sukuna and Megumi's soul, giving Sukuna less and less and less control over Megumi as a vessel. And with the less and less and less control Sukuna has over Megumi as a vessel, the less and less his AP becomes. He gets weaker. But if this is the only moment where Yuji has ever had direct access to Megumi's soul, this means this moment right before Sukuna fired off off a world-cutting cleave into Yuta's chest should be the weakest that Sukuna has ever been, and therefore should be the lowest possible AP that Sukuna could have. And therefore, while the damage done to Yuta in this moment does seem pretty substantial, Gege, immediately after Yuta is cut down, decided to draw the manga like a fourth grader who's had 6 Red Bulls, possibly somewhat purposely covering up the severity of Yuta's actual injury. I mean, this is a man who literally censored the name of Sukuna's fire arrow so we wouldn't figure out what it was too early. When things are hard to read or purposely omitted, it's usually done for a reason. On top of this, after being slashed, Yuta purposely releases his domain expansion as a signal to Maki to fly in and stab Sukuna in the back. And while one could say, oh, we just did this because he could no longer maintain his domain expansion, it's later confirmed by Kusakabe, Ino, and Maki that this was the signal that Yuta was using in order to tell Maki to fly in and join the battle. On top of this, Rika, who's bound to Yuta, was able to carry him away in this moment. But if Yuta had died right then and there, it's safe to assume that Rika also probably would have disappeared, as Yuta is her tether to Earth. And therefore, I believe the long plan, as it's been revealed over and over and over again that there is numerous long plans, is that Yuta was meant to feint his death so he could get back to Shoko while Maki and Yuji kept Sukuna occupied. With Shoko's possible help, though I doubt it would be necessary, as Yuta's one of the greatest RCT users in the entire world, as he's one of 3 people we've ever seen use RCT on another person, that list being him, Sukuna, and Shoko, and his control over RCT is so incredibly powerful that he was able to bring Yuji back from literal death. But assuming that Yuta possibly isn't able to heal all of his wounds to the level that he deems necessary, Yuta would be healed by Shoko. And while he's at Shoko's location, he would grab some of the pre-cut down friend packets, the most important of which being Gojo's. After which Yuta would make his way back to the battlefield. As it's safe to assume that Yuta is not out of cursed energy. I mean, Gojo stated that he had more cursed energy than him, and Yuta's battle against Sukuna was not that long. We've seen Yuta use way more cursed energy and be fine. Now, this is technically the first time we've ever seen Yuta use his domain expansion, and he was almost constantly using RCT, but I don't think it's crazy to assume that Yuta, the man with probably the most cursed energy on Earth, still has some. But Yuta wouldn't be returning to the battlefields alone. No, Yuta would be returning to the battlefield with Ui Ui, and when an opening was provided, Yuta would give the friend packets to Yuji, who would then consume them. And at that point, and that point only, Ui Ui would use the second swap. A swap between Yuji and Yuta, the 2 main characters of this manga. And Yuta, whose entire ability is to copy the cursed techniques of others with an equal or possibly greater level of mastery than the person he's copying them from, would be able to finally get his hands on a genetic and therefore uncopyable cursed technique that he has known for a long time. And that would be the uncopyable techniques of Gojo, the 6 Eyes, in the Limitless. And since Yuta's curse energy control is so incredible, he just does RCT through instinct, figuring out things like the Shrine, blood manipulation, the 6 Eyes, Limitless, and possibly Judge Man and Electrified CE would be much easier for Yuta than they would be for Yuji. On top of this, because of the special composition of Yuji's body, Yuta would be working with a similar amount of cursed energy that he usually has. As Chozo stated when the Kusakabe Coalition was talking about how much cursed energy RCT uses, that him and Yuji should be fine because of the composition of their body being half cursed spirit. And thus, the 2 main characters of the story would work together in each other's bodies to take down the final baddie of the story. And Kenjaku's will would truly be inherited, as the OG body switcher themselves created the perfect vessel for the man who killed the body that he inhabited for the entirety of the manga. I mean, I guess Gojo is the one who finished Kenjaku off, but you get it. And for all of you who are like, oh, that's only if Yuji survives the Fuga that Sukuna's got pointed at him right now. By the way, it's important to note that as of the filming of this video, there's only 258 chapters of JJK out. Probably got leaks for 259 in like 12 hours, and knowing my luck, this entire video is gonna be disproven. I'd like to remind each and every single one of you that Sukuna consumed his twin brother in the womb. That's important. That means the consumption ability that Yuji currently has probably originally belonged to Sukuna. Because if that consumption ability originally belonged to Yashiro and not Sukuna, then there would really be no narrative point for Sukuna to eat his twin. Because Sukuna eating Yashiro wouldn't give him the consumption ability because Sukuna doesn't have the consumption ability to begin with. And that consumption ability probably came with Cleave and Dismantle to play into the whole cutting up my food angle. That is to say that Sukuna, prior to consuming his twin, twin had the consumption ability that Yuji has and cleave and dismantle, in that Yashiro, Sukuna's twin brother, who Jin Itadori was a reincarnation of, was the original user of Fuga, the fire arrow, which is why people struggle so mightily to find the connection between the fire arrow and cleave and dismantle, with people, me, going so far as to say that the reason that Sukuna's domain expansion has sometimes been mistranslated to Malevolent Kitchen is because his actual curse technique is consumption, which requires the cutting and cooking of his opponents. But since cursed energy views twins as the same person, and we learned from Maki and Mai that one twin can be born with cursed techniques while the other can be born without them, implying that twins don't necessarily have to share a curse technique, it would make sense that Yashiro would probably have a part of the shrine while Sukuna would have the other part. And therefore, the reason that Sukuna only uses the fire arrow at certain times is because it reminds him of Yashiro, who he knows reincarnates in every single generation and always poses an issue for him, as it's loosely implied throughout the story that it was a reincarnation of Yashiro that forced Sukuna in the Heian era to break down his body into 20 fingers and send them to the future, essentially. And thus, all of this is to say, if Yashiro is supposed to be the original inheritor for Fuga, then there's a solid possibility that Jin Itadori's curse technique manifested as a fire of some sort. But we have no way of confirming that because the only person whose curse technique we do know from Yuji's family is his mother's, which is the gravity curse technique that Kenjaku uses. So all of this is to say that there's a possibility that in chapter 259, Yuji will be pointing a flame arrow right back at Sukuna. But then again, Jogo, who was a literal volcano cursed spirit and was said to be about as powerful as 8 to 9 fingers of Sukuna, lost in a fire match to 15 fingers of Sukuna, I believe. So to assume that Yuji, who's just now figuring out this whole curse technique thing, would have enough firepower to outdo Sukuna is probably a bit of a stretch. But hey, we can hope. But I'm curious to hear what you guys think. Do you believe that Yuji at some point or another will end up eating a little bit of his friends to get their curse techniques? Or do you believe that it only applies to cursed spirits? Tell me in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Listen, just bring him one of Gojo's eyes. It's got a fair to good chance of working.